There is trouble all over this world. Yes, there is trouble all over this world. Children, there is trouble all over this world.
Thanks so much to the Joyspring Community Choir and director Jonathan Singleton. Can we please give them another hand? Good evening. My name is Jack Wright. I'm the marketing director for the Celebrity Series of Boston. I'm delighted to be here and so grateful to all of tonight's participants. Celebrity Series has been bringing to Boston artists that inspire and enrich our community since 1938. This spring, we're pleased to be presenting performances by both of this evening's panelists. Solomon Duma, who has been with us this week as part of our annual visit to Boston area schools and community centers, will perform at the Wang Theater with Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, April 30 to May 3rd. Two other dancers from the company are in town and in the house for this week, Kalia Campbell and Jessica Pinkett, over here to my left. And we are thrilled to present the area debut of, and I say that because it's a Boston debut, but the performance is in Cambridge, so we know that's important around here, that distinction. It's an area debut of Trey McLaughlin and Sounds of Zamar next Friday, January 31 at Sanders Theater in Cambridge. I'm sure you will all be interested in both shows. But to thank you for being here tonight, we have coupons for discounted tickets available at the Celebrity Series table that you all came by out in the lobby just a moment ago. I also want to mention Mr. McLaughlin will also be leading The Joy of Singing, a free gospel workshop next Thursday, January 30th at the Jose Mateo Ballet Sanctuary Theater in Cambridge. Tickets are going very fast for that event, but I want to be sure and mention it for those that might be able to slip in at the end. Information and tickets for all these programs are available at celebrityseries.org. And I'm delighted to welcome to the stage WBUR ARTery reporter Cristela Guerra, Cristela Guerra, and your panel for tonight's conversation. Thanks very much.
How's everybody doing? You good? Yeah? It's not too cold? It's not too cold. No. Thank God. It is my honor and privilege to be up here with these panelists and these artists. We got to talk a little bit beforehand, and I'd like to read their bios, just tell you a little bit about them before we begin. So, Trey McLaughlin. In addition to being the founder and director of the Sounds of Zamar, a musician and an accomplished composer, Trey McLaughlin currently serves as the director of Barefoot Productions, Inc., Creative Impressions. Trey is also the director of worship and arts at the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church, located in Augusta, Georgia. Welcome. Solomon Duma was introduced to dance through Ailey Camp and joined the company in 2016. He later began his formal training at the Chicago Academy for the Arts and the Russell Talbert Dance Studio, where he received his most influential training. Mr. Dumas studied at New World School of the Arts and was a fellowship level 1 student at the Ailey School. Welcome. So I'm really curious, how many people in here have seen Revelations, or, yeah? Okay, all right. So we know what we're talking about. I spent quite a bit of time doing research. I saw Revelations about 2 years ago when it came through Boston. And I was looking at an article from the New York Times, and I thought this was really beautiful. It described it as a dance on land and in water, a journey through African-American spiritual music, and for dancers, an act of reverence for the generations that came before. Dancers in the story said that as soon as the music starts, they feel transported, and I think the audience does too. Is Paris here? Paris Alston works with Paris works with Radio Boston, and she is my colleague and an incredible journalist. And I was talking to friends about what gospel music means to them, raised in that tradition, and I thought she described it perfectly. She said that she considers gospel a way to communicate with the ancestors. And I asked her for permission to include that just because I feel like it's something to think about as we discuss. This is some of what I want to delve into, the idea of the sacred, of worship, and how gospel acts as a conduit for so many, both in and outside the church. It's affected the greater culture, and we can see this year on the 60th anniversary of Revelations. In a video of Alvin Ailey I watched earlier, he called gospel holy blues and anthems to the human spirit. So with that, I'd ask you both, what was your first experience with gospel? When was that? What do you remember?
Oh, okay. So I'm originally from the south side of Chicago, and so if you know anything about the Midwestern cities, most, if not all, Black people have roots from the South. They came up through the Great Migration. And so with that, you had a lot of retentions from the South. And that was going to church, a Baptist church in particular. And being at a Baptist church, I remember going with a lady who watched over me. Her name, I used to refer to her as Granny or Miss Williams, because my mom was a working single mother, so she worked on Sundays. And so Granny would escort me. She was originally from Mississippi. And I would go to church from sunup to sundown. And yeah, but you know what? It was what you did. It was a part of the Black experience, especially when you're dealing with people of a certain generation. Now, you know, we've expanded our understanding of spirituality, but at that time, the Black church, church in general, was the largest enterprise in the Black community, and it was what it is, community. And so being at church, well, one thing that really stood out to me, and people joke about it a lot, and people make satire of it, and I have to catch myself sometimes. I try not to indulge in that, but the idea of the Holy Spirit, being consumed with the Holy Spirit, and in praise and worship, what that does for the person who's being delivered in that moment into a higher spiritual understanding or presence, or that's all I can, or trance. That's what I distinctly remember, and it was something that happened at every service, and it was something that that I could look forward to. And at times I became numb to it because it happened so often, and it took me a minute to understand what was really happening. But that is the praise and worship aspect of church was something that it's my most indelible memory. I could go on and on and on, but I want to give Trey a minute to express his experiences.
I'm from Augusta, Georgia. And actually, my family is Northern. So my family is actually from the New York area, but I was born in Augusta, Georgia. So we used to go to church with my mom's friends when I was a kid. And I'm from Augusta, but there's another smaller town that's pretty close called Lincoln, Georgia. And we went to a little church called White Rock. There may have been 30 people in their little Baptist church. We had a piano, no drums, so a lot of foot stomping and hand clapping. But my earliest experience was probably listening to the soloists sing their songs and trying to imitate them when I would get home. I think that's kind of how my mom found out I could sing, because she was like, wait, that's not bad. But I think the passion and conviction that they had just in expressing themselves vocally, even as a kid, touched me. So I was the child that, you know, the older people would be singing, Father, and they're like singing, Father, I stretch my hand to thee, and they're crying out, and I'm sitting in the corner crying too, because I mean, I felt that thing, you know? And I'm like 8, but I have always been very touched by people who are extremely invested in emoting what they're singing about, always. And it really didn't matter. But you see it more in the church than you did in other places. But that was kind of the beginning of me as like a 3-year-old, because the first time I really was like, hey, I like this. I was about 3. That was my first real experience with Black music, church, and spirituality.
Thank you both. Solomon, can you talk to me about how you got your start in dance and then in Alvin Ailey?
Okay, so one of the components of the Ailey organization is outreach, and Mr. Ailey, before he made his transition before he died in 1989, one of his last dreams was to dedicate a camp or a program to inner city youth, or underprivileged. I don't like saying at risk, but underprivileged youth who don't have access to discipline through arts and dance and all of the fine arts. So he created Ailey Camp, and that was the dream materialized into Ailey Camp. And I was a student in Ailey Camp. My mother forced me to go to the camp only because I didn't know anything about dance, concert dance, or the codified techniques of dance, and I hadn't really been exposed to anything or anybody who looked like me who danced in that way. And so she enrolled me in a camp. She forced me to go, and we say this thing in the dance culture. You say dance, you don't choose dance, dance chooses you. And I think that's what happened, being exposed to the history of Mr. Ailey. And I just spoke about this earlier. The parallels that I saw in Mr. Ailey's life and in my life. He was raised by a single mom. He was from the South. My roots are from the South. He discovered dance at a younger age. I was, younger. He was a teenager. I was a teenager when I really took dance seriously. But what was most profound was his choreography and his point of reference and what he choreographed about the Black experience, and which was his point of reference. And it was something that I immediately, it resonated with me. I was able to understand what it was I was looking at, because, you have to think about what we consider high art. And as a 13-year-old, usually, depending on your background, that's not necessarily something that you're interested in. But I came to the theater. My mother took me to see a performance, and I knew exactly what I was watching. And I saw a reflection of myself on the stage. I understood what it was I was hearing. I knew that it was implicit understanding. I mean, it was just something that it was in my spirit. It resonated with me, and so then my life was consumed with Ailey. I was consumed with Ailey. I was just like, I don't know what's the word. What word am I looking for? I was a fanatic. I wanted to be in Alvin Ailey, and I think the reason why that was the only dance company I wanted, because the work was about me. The work was about my ancestors. I understood the work. I knew the people that this work was made about.
Thank you.
Sing.
That was perfect, honestly. I think it's a good transition to one of the videos I believe that we have. It's of Revelations, I believe. Can we put that on? Yeah. It's just stunning, isn't it? I feel like I look at that and I see the movement the movement, you're captured by the lines and then the music. And I'm curious if you said, I'd never been exposed to a company full of beautiful people that looked like me, that you looked at the company and that you aspired to move as they did. What is the legacy of this for you?
Oh, wow. Mr. Ailey's celebration of Blackness, there's this buzzword going around. I don't know if you guys are avid social media followers or what, but there's this buzzword called Black Excellence, hashtag Black Excellence. And that's what resonated with me when I first saw the company, but the idea that Mr. Ailey celebrated the excellence of Black people in our most organic and natural form. You know, he celebrated that experience, which the Black experience is actually a universal experience. If you think about it, we're no different from any other group. I think at that time, and if you think about when he choreographed that, he choreographed 1960. That was in the smack dab in the middle of the civil rights era, and so we know what was going on in our country, where we were trying to just get recognition and acknowledgement, and trying to open doors for ourselves, and we still are in a way, but open doors so that we can be who we are, receive the education we deserve, perform and share our culture through art. I think that is the legacy of Mr. Ailey, celebrating the Black experience through the modern dance tradition and all of its complexities. Like I was talking to my coworkers, the fabulous, dynamic, explosive, volcanic Jessica Pinkett, and the divine, supreme, expressive Kalia Campbell. Yes. We were just discussing this earlier. That is the legacy. And so I'm at a loss for words. Like it's so much bigger than who I am, but we're ambassadors of that legacy. And when we go around the world, we tour around the world and we go to Europe, and there's no other reception. We don't get the same reception in the US that we do. Like in the US, people are on the parking lot. In Europe, they're still clapping 30 minutes after the performance is over in unison. And because I think it's a special occasion for them to see us share what it is that we're about through the modern dance tradition, through concert dance. It's a special occasion to see, still to this day in 2020, it's a special occasion to see dancers of color, Black dancers, dancing about where they're from in that, amplified like that. It's still a special occasion to see that. So that's what it is for me to be a part of this legacy, Mr. Ailey's legacy. Being able to give back to the communities and to the children that deserve to be healed and disciplined through the art, to deserve the discipline and healing that you receive through the arts, and the experience it is to see yourself reflected like that on stage. We're here with being presented by a celebrity series. We're doing a series of master classes and lecture demonstrations. And we go into communities that probably aren't able to come see us. And so that is a part of Mr. Ailey's legacy, giving dance back to the people. And it's not an elitist form. You know what I mean? Dance came from the people. It's a part of as Black people, it's a part of our heritage. The only thing that we were really able to keep with us was that intrinsic ability to move and sing and dance we weren't able to be educated when we first got here. So what became of our heritage and our spirituality was what we brought back from Africa, and that was the movement. And I think it goes back to why it is, that what I remember growing up in church, that praise and worship and that movement that happens when people like go to the next level. It's embedded in your soul and your DNA, and yeah, I went everywhere with that one. But y'all are still with me, right? Y'all are still with me. I went all around the world and back again, but y'all are still with me.
I think it was perfect, actually. And it's a good transition to, movement and then song. Trey, could you talk a bit about just, how Sounds of Zamar was born, when you found your voice, which I think you mentioned a bit when you were 3. But, this was your earliest memory of creating music. Can you unpack what music has been for you?
Definitely. I've known, like I said, since I was 3. My mother worked at a college, so when I found out that I could grow up to be a grown person and go to school to sing, I never wanted to do anything else. So I've never flip-flopped. People, what do you want to be? I'm going to be a singer, is what I always said. But my experience was a little different than Solomon's, because once my mom figured out I was serious about singing, of course I sung in church all the time and gospel and gospel choirs, but then she enrolled me into a performing arts magnet school because she wanted to make sure that I got the training that I needed. So then I don't really have a lot of teachers that look like me, right? And so they have this kid who has a pretty good voice, and they tell me, well, you need to sing opera. So I studied opera through high school. We did the competitions, won competitions. I got into my college on a scholarship for vocal performance and began studying opera because I'm going to be an opera singer, because all of my teachers are telling me the only way that I'm going to be a legitimate performer is if I do opera.
Classical training.
Classical training, right, which was great for me. I love my classical training. It's given me longevity in being able to do what I do on another level, but it also did not do anything to uplift my natural gift or my natural ability. So I spent most of my high school and college career not deeming what I could do outside of being able to sing Mozart and Puccini and Verdi important. I didn't think it was worth anything, so the whole church experience was a big part of who I was, and we were in church all day just like you know what I'm saying? And I took over the gospel choir at my college, but I'm listening to my teachers tell me, well, this is not going to be legitimate. You need to, my teacher said, I told you to quit that gospel choir, but he didn't know. I was the director of the gospel choir. I couldn't quit. I ain't tell him that, though. So once I graduated from college, I vacillated back and forth between what I wanted to do, because I had ended up doing a minor in vocal pedagogy as well. So I was like, well, I'll be a teacher. I'll teach in the school system. And I had a couple of teaching jobs, and I was just immensely unhappy unless I was teaching kids who were actually my personal pupils. Other than that, I was just unhappy, and I started to get invitations to come sing places, and I'm actually kind of shy, believe it or not. I mean, I'm a ham on the stage, but I'm a shy individual, so I asked my friends to come with me to sing background, but I would always rearrange people's songs to make them how I felt them, and so we would sing my arrangements, and then I started to teach them original music, and after a while, we had been together for like 2 years. We might as well name ourselves, because we were called Trey and Them, or Trey and Friends. And from there, the group Zamar was born. I started out with 6, then 6 doubled to 12, then 12 became 27 when everybody shows up. So it kind of grew from there. But I definitely, Zamar gave me a chance to take everything that I was told wasn't important and was not worth any note or even looking at or giving a second glance. It gave me a platform to impart all of those things that were inside of me and express them musically. And it's mine, so no one can tell me what to do with it.
I think that is a perfect transition to the other video that we have, which is Sounds of Zamar. I think you should bask in that a little bit. That was, oof. I want to get into, and we can sort of discuss this openly, like the history of gospel. I mean, I mentioned to them, I grew up in church 3-4 times a week, but, you know, evangelical, non-denominational Christian in Florida, you know, white churches and Latinx churches mainly, and it was contemporary Christian music with some gospel. It's a very different tradition when you're looking at the roots of African spirituals, you know, the roots of that mostly is rooted in slavery. I mean, we're talking about something that goes back years, centuries, you know. So I want to get a bit into the history of this, you know, the history of the music and maybe what you feel people don't understand about its origins.
I think that people don't really realize how impactful gospel music has been on all music in America. So going back to the African style of music, which is call and response, in African music, community is everything. It's really about community. So when people sing songs in African villages, and if you can look it up on YouTube now because the World Wide Web is great, you can look it up. The whole community is singing. The whole community is dancing because it's not about a performance. It's about community. It's not this group of people are performing these for another group of people. It's we're happy there's been a new birth in the city, right? So things of that nature, community is important. So when we came over here, when we were brought here, we brought that same tradition, enthusiasm, everything with us. So a lot of Negro spirituals are in the call and response style, right? You have the Negro spiritual, which kind of transitioned into what we know as blues nowadays. And a lot of the chord progressions in older style gospel music and blues are the same. It's the exact same, right? So then from blues, you have ragtime, right? And then from ragtime, you have a style of music that is sung and performed all over this world, everywhere, jazz, right? Which has managed to make its way into almost every style, including choral music. Come here, Eric Whitaker, and a lot of other great choral composers who are now using jazz chord progressions in their compositions. All of this really from the music of slaves. All of it.
Yeah. Can you say that again? Just the last part.
All of this from the music of slaves.
Thank you. So to relate this to Revelation, Solomon, and actually Trey, I'd love you to answer this. How does the music behind Revelations raise the performance to the greater height that it raises it to? I mean, when you're on stage and those voices surround you, it's split into 3 parts, correct? So there's a different emotion to each portion. Mm-hmm. But could you talk a bit about that? And then Trey, I'd love you to get into some of this.
Perfect. So Mr. Ailey choreographed Revelations in 3 parts. First part starting with Pilgrims of Sorrow, and that part really depicts the tragedies of human life, human suffering, what slaves were going through at that time. They really used the Bible as a tool to, and the gospel as a tool to manage life, period. So Pilgrims of Sorrow, you start with I've been buked and I've been scorned, talking about what you've been through. Then you have, didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Deliverance. If God delivered Daniel from the fiery furnace, he can deliver every man, okay? Then you go into Fix Me Jesus, which examines like being the total dependence of Jesus, of a higher power, of your Lord and Savior. Then you go into the second section called Take Me to the Water, which is about baptism, which in the Black church was your way of accepting God in your life, being born again, accepting Jesus as your Savior. So we didn't have bar mitzvahs, and we didn't have Sweet 16s, and we didn't get Mercedes Benz and all of that stuff. We went to church, and you dedicated your life to Christ, and so that's what that section, what we call Take Me to the Water, when you're dressed in all white, that represents that section. Then you have Move, Members Move, which is a celebration of coming from tragedy, being delivered from tragedy, and celebrating that. And so, spirituality was our tool to see another day. You understand? You guys understand that, right? We use religion, our spirituality, as a tool to make it to another day. And we celebrated life through all of the challenges and tragedy. And so that is really, it seems like that is the structure of Negro spiritual, right? Like acknowledging your human experience. Like I'm experiencing hell on earth. Lord, deliver me. You've been delivered, and now your celebration, whether it's out of challenges or going to the promised land, that's what that celebration is about. And so Revelations is really like a structure of Negro spirituals. It gives you visual context to what it is that what you guys listen to, what we've been singing about for hundreds of years. It just gives you that visual context for me. And I think for a lot of people, when we go to Europe, I think they have their aha moment when they see us. They're like, oh, that's what that is. That's what that section, the last section is. A celebration of life. Going back to community engagement. It's all about community engagement.
Trey?
I think, what I love most about, because, I used to dance a little bit too back in the day.
I used to sing in the
just
church.
a little bit. You
Call
know
and
what
response.
I'm saying?
Call and response. Come on.
So, I think what is amazing to see, and even if you don't dance, if you're a creative person, I think you can appreciate the visuals that have been created. And what I enjoy most is the same way a lot of composers from the Baroque period and classical period would use word painting. In fact, one of the things we love most in the classical world about Mozart is that he would paint the text with his melody line and make it even more beautiful. It's like the words and the melody were created. And what I love about Revelation is that the movement and the vocals are as one. Like, it's very fluid. The movement is not just movement for movement's sake. It's movement because of what the music is doing, which once again goes back to the African tradition. If you've ever taken an African dance class, the first thing you learn is that you don't change movements until you hear something called the
break. The break or the call or the break.
The call, the break, whatever it is, whatever the head drummer is doing, docky dot docky dot dot dot, then you change.
Come on.
Right? Whatever it is gonna be. African drum on my own time too. I got you, right? But
You're versatile?
oh yes.
Versatile?
Oh yes.
Boy.
We do everything over here.
All right.
But it is a big part of African tradition in music. The music and the dance go together. And I think that Alvin Ailey did an amazing job of choreographing. I mean, it's almost like the dance sits in the music. Like, it is one of the most amazing things that I've ever seen and experienced. And the same way that the music that we hear stirs our soul, the dancing does as well. And I think that's what makes it such an iconic thing. And I think that's why when people experience it, they are changed. Because it is such an amazing rush of emotion and realness that has been put on the stage.
I think it's also it's a good introduction to people who don't know anything about concert dance, but you know the music. Like, I'll give you a quick little caveat. My grandfather, who's deceased, if he were alive, he would be 92, 93, okay. But he died of Alzheimer's. But at the time he saw me perform Revelations, I was in our second company, our junior company, and we had traveled to Birmingham, Alabama. That's where he relocated to. And he was actually born there, but he relocated to Birmingham, Alabama. My mom made sure that he came to the performance, and so at that time he was dealing with dementia. It progressed into Alzheimer's, and so if you know anything about that, you know the person can be here one day and then they're somewhere else, and so you never know when they're gonna be in their right mind. And so, but he came to the performance. And when Revelations began, my mom was sitting next to him, and he hummed for the entire 30 minutes of the piece. He was humming. He was completely engaged and engrossed. And so, dare I say, Revelations has an anointing on it, because my grandfather doesn't know anything about dance. But when he was going through the challenges of dementia and early onset Alzheimer's, he was completely engaged and engrossed in that experience. He remembered the songs. So that is a lot of people's introduction into concert dance. And like you said, piggybacking off of what you said about the movement, Mr. Ailey used elements of modern dance, ballet, jazz. And jazz was to back then what hip hop is now. So he used jazz, social dances. He also used a lot of dances from the vernacular African diasporic vernacular. So to really support the music, because the music came first actually, and the choreography came secondary. He grew up listening to this music. So dare I say, going back to what I was saying, I think there's an anointing on the ballet, and you really don't hear that mixing of concert dance and spirituality, but for some odd reason, this has worked, and it's lasted for 60 years, hopefully 60 more years. So,
what this is kind of an odd question, I guess. What is the role of gospel today in arts and culture, in the larger, like, what is it calling us to understand?
I think it's calling us to come together. Again, community is key. And in the African American church, worship is a corporate thing. And we're starting to see it really take over more so in the church in general. A lot of times, most churches were spectators, right? Now you see a lot of churches incorporating praise and worship. But praise and worship is an old concept to the African American church, because we had devotion. If you are from the old school black church, then you know devotion is when two deacons get up in front of the congregation and they hold a little black book and they'll call out the name of a hymn and say, "A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify," and everyone in the room will join in and sing all together. I think that has always been the central theme of gospel music. And although now it doesn't sound like that anymore, I mean, people do still sing those songs, but gospel music doesn't sound bluesy anymore. Now it can sound Afro-Latin or any way that we want it to sound, CCM, anything. But the goal is still to create community, to create an atmosphere of corporate participation. And I think that that has remained even though the sound has changed.
I remember, like I said, I was in church a lot. Things changed a little bit later, mostly when I came out of the closet. But that said, worship was it. And I remember being like 14 and getting lost in the gap, as it's known, right? In the gap with God, in the gap with something divine. And that was the thing I cherished most, was worship. Because, you know, there can be a lot of words, a lot of things stated, but there's something beyond that was sacred there for me as an adolescent that supported me. And I'm going to be 35 now, and I still remember it, and that's why that music still gives me chills. You know, I feel like there's something to that. Do you have a favorite song? Is there a song or a moment in that, you know, wavelength that I'm sort of referencing? Do you remember when the music carried you away?
I have so many favorite moments. My favorite song right now, and I say right now, but it has been since I was in like 7th grade, is Optimistic by the Sounds of Blackness. It's my favorite song, not just because the words are so positive, but the chord progressions are gorgeous, right? And at the time it came out, not a lot of people who were doing popular music, because it came out on the R&B stations, a lot of them weren't using those kinds of chord progressions anymore. I mean, unless you're Earth, Wind, and Fire. But other than that, they weren't really using things that sounded that way. And I didn't even understand chording yet. But I knew how the music made me feel. And that song still makes me feel that way. But I'm also a singer who likes a lot of different kinds of music, and there have been several moments, the Rachmaninoff stuff. I mean, a lot of moments where music definitely took me to another place. But that's the wonderful thing about music, is that you're not limited to one experience. I think you can always feel something if the performer and the composer connect.
Sullivan, do you have a favorite?
Oh, God, so many. Of course I love Sounds of Blackness. Of course I love Yolanda Adams, and this song just came up. It was a song, it's older, it's from the 90s. I don't, oh God. Don't, okay. No shade, no, I'm just, no, it's not. No, 90s was 20 years ago. Okay, so, no, This Joy is from one of her older albums, her earlier albums. So many, and like I said, I love gospel music, but I love jazz, I love hip hop, and all of the derivatives from gospel. I love all of the rock and roll, jazz, soul, R&B, all of that. One section, and to bring it back to Revelations, one section that I've grown to evolve in is a section called "Wade in the Water."
Yeah.
And it's about, like I said before, it's about a baptism and accepting God in your life. And as I don't know, it's reflective of that rites of passage. But again, there's an anointing, and I don't mean to repeat myself. I've had some really transformative experiences performing that piece, that section in particular. And interestingly enough, we're human, artists are human, and so we have our challenges, whether we created the challenge or contributed to the challenge. But when you perform Revelations, you're called to, in the presence of the organization, but in that piece in particular, you're called to let it all go and just submit to the man's steps, to Mr. Ailey's step. And there's something that happens to me, and I know I'm gonna go out on a limb and speak for my coworkers that you come out, you in that piece changed. I've gone on and I've limped to the stage and I've done the work and all in, you know, I don't mean to sound corny, but all of my pain, I've gone to another place. And then I come back down when the curtain is comes down and I limp back to the dressing room. But it's that section in particular and that song in particular, it holds so much weight spiritually.
It's the kind of surrender.
Yeah.
It's like a letting go.
Letting go.
But I mean, that's not even the word, right? Like it's something.
No, we haven't found that word yet. We haven't found it yet. But
call it
submitting
withholding nothing.
Exactly.
So it's kind of you decide in that moment that you're going to give all of you and not just the best parts, not just my best sounding voice, not just my best face. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give my entire self to this performance, right? Because that's what's going to connect with your people. Mm-hmm. You being human, not you being perfect, right?
And I think people can recognize that. I think audiences, you guys are smart. You guys understand that experience. You guys can recognize that experience. It's what brings a soul to soul music. It's what brings a soul to. There's this esoteric term that we have in the dance community called black dance, and people don't necessarily know how to define it, but it is what it is, and it's that submitting and bringing your soul to the work. You know, there's art, and then there's bringing that extra-ness to the work.
And I think he said something earlier because he was saying the black experience is not that much different. Listen, people are people wherever you go, whatever country or culture you're from. You have folk music, you have formal music. It's the same across the board. And I've been to classical performances and in classical performances that were transformative for me. And it wasn't about the style. So a lot of times we get caught up in the style of music. That's not the most important thing. It's the connection and what you put into it. The only difference is typically in the African American experience, we put that in everything.
We put our foot in it.
Everything. That's why it's something that we keep saying over and over again. But I think that any performance that you go to, whether I love country music, I enjoy, you know why I like country music? Because they tell great stories. And they seem very involved in what they're singing. It connects with me. I will listen to the country station and cry because I enjoy the music and the way it makes me feel. So I think that anything can be transformative. It doesn't just have to be the black experience. It's just characteristic of the black experience because we don't know how to do stuff without it.
Amen.
I was about to say. I'll ask just one more question and actually open it up for questions from the audience. There's a quote from Judith Jameson, Alvin Ailey's artistic director emerita, I believe that's how you pronounce that. It was in an article, and she said, Alvin was making a statement about African-American cultural experience, saying, hey, this is who we are, we live here, we were born here. It was a brave action. Civil rights were roaring, and our protest was our performance. So I would ask you both, I mean, how is this going to be received over the next 60 years? How are future generations going to take on this? We know that what they were dealing with back then is still happening as we speak right now. And we know that it's inherently political, what's happening on that stage, regardless. The music is political, the dance is political. There's no way it can't be. So what are we hoping for the next generation? How do we want them to receive Revelations?
That is a great question. We just have to continue to do the work. We have to continue to do the work and tell the stories. And so for many choreographers, Mr. Ailey's legacy has inspired so many artists, so many dancers, so many choreographers, so many composers, like what he said, what Miss Jamison said, he was just being who he was being who he is and expressing that and saying, hey, this is who I am, this is me. A lot of artists are afraid to tap into their blackness because they're afraid that they're going to come off as, there's this idea that when black people express the love for themselves, there's this idea that they're anti anything else, which is not, that is not true. It's the furthest thing from the truth. I think it's definitely a stand against white supremacy, because in this country there was a time when it was what it was. White was supreme, and there were lynchings. There were so many horrible things that were happening to people of color, black people, because they were just being who they were. And so I think that a lot of that that fear has retained. We've retained a lot of that fear, but as long as Revelations is a tool to release that fear for future generations, they can they can look at this man's work from 60 years ago, and they can say, okay, who is Solomon in 2020? What is my experience, and how can I not necessarily create the next Revelations, but how can I use that as a prototype to create work that is reflective of my experience as a black man in America in 2020, or my experiences? Like, I would hope that we continue to do that work, and we continue to celebrate, because it's a celebration of our experiences, our human experience. It's just through a black man's lens. That's what I hope the legacy will be, that we continue to do the work. And as long as the Mona Lisa is hanging up in, where is it? Is it in Paris and at the Louvre? As long as they hang that up there, we're going to continue to do Revelations.
Absolutely.
We're going to continue to do Revelations.
Absolutely.
And continue to share our experience.
Trey?
Community. At the end of the day, that is my word. That is my key phrase, community, community. I think that Revelations creates community by exposing people to the African American experience, giving them a very real connection with real people. And I think that opens up a dialogue like this one, which allows us to come together. So my hope is that we can continue the legacy of creating community, presenting Black excellence, and showing that excellence is not a culture, excellence is not a race. Anything can be made excellent. So.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? I think Alex has a microphone.
I have a question for Solomon. Singing is breathing to me. Ever since I could talk, I was singing. So was dance like that for you?
Yes. And the funny thing is that my mom said, she told me this story recently. She told me that in the building that we lived in, there was like this holiday party in the lobby of the building, and I was maybe like 2 or 3 or something. I was young, I don't remember it, but they were playing Whitney Houston at the holiday party, and I was just like really like into the music. Whitney Houston, go whatever. But I was really into the music, and everybody of course, when you see a little kid just really like engaged in, the pageantry of a party and Whitney Houston and all of that, of course, like all of this attention was directed towards me, and I was just like living in that attention. But she said I was really energetic, and I moved a lot, and I find myself moving like right now, but I still didn't understand that dancing as a professional, I didn't understand it to be an actual profession or career, or I hadn't been exposed to companies that looked like me, or that hired people that looked like me. So it took me to see this company, to see Alvin Ailey, and that's when the light bulb, I had an aha moment. So definitely dance is something that, if anything, I just want to be able to dance when music comes on. At 60 years old, I just want to be able to groove. So that's before I received classical training. I really loved to groove and just, move around. It is my oxygen.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I grew up in Haiti, and I went to dance school that was taught by Lavinia Williams, which was an African-American woman who combined ballet, modern dance, and Haitian folk dance to teach us the pride of dancing. And when I saw Celebration for the first time in the US, that was the first time I saw the African vernacular combined with the classical music that she was teaching us. And it was just, to this day, whenever I see Celebration, it's like an anointing, as you say. Revelation.
I understand you.
To move.
Revelations is a celebration of the Black experience through the modern dance tradition. So I'm with you.
So when you go to other countries who are of the African diaspora, do they get that same sort of? Do you get that same sense?
Well, yes. Of course, when we go to Europe, we also we have not traveled to. We went to South Africa in 2015 before I joined the company. But I can speak to the Black people in Europe who understand exactly what it is that we're doing. We do, and we know what we do. Other reps in the we have other ballets in the repertoire, other pieces in the repertoire, and they run the gamut. Like we do contemporary ballet, we do jazz. But Mr. Ailey, I want to tie it back into what you said. Catherine Dunham was one of Mr. Ailey's big influences. Like seeing that company, Mr. Ailey held her to the highest esteem. And Catherine Dunham, if you know anything about Catherine Dunham, if you don't, Google her. She is the mother of Black dance in America. She was an educated woman. She was an anthropologist. She went to Cuba and Haiti, and she studied the movements, and she went to their sacred rituals, their spiritual rituals, and she came back and she developed a technique based on that movement. And Mr. Ailey saw her company as a young man, and he was really inspired by that. So it's interesting that you've made that correlation because, in particular, the movement Wade in the Water, he uses a lot of Afro-Caribbean folkloric movement to. There's a step that we call Yanvalou, and that comes directly from Haiti, and it's evident in his choreography. So people, it's intrinsic. That movement. So people recognize it all around the world. When we give master classes, the people of color who take those master classes, they are in the front and they are ready and they're soaking it up like a sponge. They're like, come on. So definitely, there's an understanding.
Hi, I had a question for you about traditional, what I would think of as traditional African music, and to me, going back far enough, I think of that as being pre-Christian, before there was a Christian influence to it. I'm wondering, to what extent did the style of the music change the thoughts, the emotions of the music and movement, with the influence of Christianity?
I don't think that the music itself changed very much, as in who it's directed to changed, right? But even with that, the sense of community was still a huge thing. And to be honest, most gospel music is still in the style of how it was when in African tradition. So most gospel music is still call and response. Most praise and worship music, if you listen to it, the worship leader says something, the crowd says something else. So I don't really think anything changed but the message itself. The music is still set up, but now because we were taught Christianity and it became a part of who we were, it was one more thing for us to sing about and express ourselves.
I agree.
Hi, I have a question. Hi, Trey. I wanted to know if you could discuss maybe the bilingualism that occurs in Black spiritualism and gospel music, specifically this idea that we can sing and make sounds you cannot spell, and that there's hidden messaging in that, right? You were brought over as, all these different slaves from different parts of Africa who did not speak the same African language, right? There was diversity within that. How somehow you become on this one plantation, and through generations, as a 3-year-old child, and I'm sure as you grew up, you were able to probably understand songs and make sounds that, like I said, once again, you cannot spell, but it was a form of communication. And if you could sort of speak to that.
Definitely. That it's another part of, to me, the human experience. Connection, and the way that we connect with people is not always verbal. You can't always speak a connection into existence, right? So I do a lot of workshops overseas, and a lot of times there's this huge language barrier, and it's extremely awkward until we start to sing. And a lot of times they may not even know what they're singing, right? They may not even know what these words mean, but they know how it makes them feel. And so I think that that's a huge part of our experience. And even in the Black church today, I mean, you'll hear a soloist get up and start making crazy noises in the middle of the song, and the church just goes crazy because they know. They know, a soloist will be, I call it exhorting, but it's usually when a soloist is like telling a story or something during a gospel song, and they're going through it, and they'll start going, ah, 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 and everybody's like, yes! Like, we know. So I think that, once again, it's about the human connection rather than the text in a lot of cases, yeah.
So I had a question about who the modern vanguard are of Black dance and gospel, and what we're seeing from them now and what you hope for them going forward.
Black dance, Camille A. Brown is a choreographer, a dancer, choreographer who is Tony nominated, Princess Grace Award winning. She has choreographed, she has her own company, but she's choreographed at least 4 Broadway shows now. She's choreographed TV specials. She's choreographed Porgy and Bess at the Met. Met. They know the Met. She is the vanguard of Black dance. She's a female choreographer, Black female choreographer. So if you know anything about the patriarchy of the arts, choreography is a male-dominated field. Directing and artistic director, everything is male-dominated. And so she is pushing that door open for women as well as Black women. Her work is rooted in the Black African vernacular, dance vernaculars. She uses contemporary, modern, African hip-hop in her movement. Camille Brown, a dancer by the name, a choreographer by the name of Jamar Roberts. I don't know his middle name. I added that A. I don't know why. But Jamar Roberts, who is a resident choreographer for Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. He's a new budding contemporary choreographer. He just choreographed his second work. His first work was entitled Members Don't Get Weary. His second work is entitled, oh my God, somebody help me. Ode, and that's dedicated to victims of gun violence. He's choreographed on Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, as well as he's a guest artist with the company now. He's choreographing a new work on New York City Ballet and Miami City Ballet. So Camille Brown, Jamar Roberts, help me out. Help me out. Who else? Who else? Another black choreographer who is the vanguard. Kyle Abraham from Pittsburgh. He has his own company. He's done work on the first company. He's another contemporary choreographer. So all these people, Kyle Abraham, Camille A. Brown, Jamar Roberts, Jewel Lane. I'm just going to start naming. Darrell Grand Moultrie. And Jewel, what's his last name? Jewel Lane. These are all people that you can Google, and they are the new black dance modern vanguards of 2020.
Oh, hey. I'm going to use all them names with my dance friends when I leave here. Perfect. Act like I know something. Gospel music is a little different now. There are two artists that have changed the game, and they're older artists. So you have Kirk Franklin, who made gospel mainstream, like point blank period. He just made it mainstream. He also made it not limited. So he took the restraints off in how it sounds and where it goes. Then you have Israel Houghton, who was one of the first gospel artists to take CCM songs or take a CCM sound. Those of you who don't know what CCM is Christian contemporary music. It's very guitar-led. Sounds like soft rock is what we would compare it to. To take CCM songs and make them, sound gospel, right? They're older artists, but because of them, now you see a lot of independent artists who are coming up, like myself, and several others who are up and coming. They're not necessarily famous. Chandler Moore is one. He's starting to get really big. A young African-American guy that plays guitar, and he composes CCM spoil is what I would call it, because it's CCM on one hand, but it also sounds like contemporary Christian music. And then you have artists like Kiera Sheard, who kind of does whatever she wants. Her music can sound any kind of way. Really, you could look up any one of those artists on YouTube, and a playlist would come up of different independent artists who are up and coming, and people are singing their music in churches all over the country. So we don't have a lot of specific up and coming names, but there are a lot of up and coming Christian artists that you can look up.
Thank you both. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah, possibly. Anybody else? I'm tempted to make... Yeah? Let's do it.
Okay, so you can tell me no. I can accept a no. It's
I'm
okay.
excited.
But I feel like I have to ask. With this amazing choir over here and Trey over there, can you just give us a snippet of call?
You were worried about this?
Of call and response. Call and response.
Of call and response?
Yes.
Let's see. I don't know what y'all know. Who grew up in the church? Y'all know Trouble in My Way? Who knows Trouble in My Way? We got some backup over there? Y'all don't know Trouble in My Way? Let's see. Trouble in my way. I have to cry sometime. So much trouble. I have to cry sometime. I laid awake at night. And that's alright. I know that Jesus, I know that Jesus, hey, Jesus, I know that Jesus, after a while,
just been the most wonderful night. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. I want to thank you both for your time and your honesty and your vulnerability. Just thank you. And I'm happy to announce that we're going to bring the Joyspring Community Choir back up. And they are from 12th Baptist Church of Roxbury with director Jonathan Singleton.
Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Oh, rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Oh, rock my soul.
I may be weak.
Rock my soul.
I may be strong.
Rock my soul.
I'm leaning on.
Leaning on.
I'm leaning on His mighty arm.
Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Oh, rock my soul.
My soul is glad.
Rock my soul.
My soul is free.
Rock my soul.
I'm going home.
Going home.
I'm going home to live with Thee. Oh, rock my soul
In the bosom of Abraham.
my soul
In the bosom of Abraham. Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Oh, rock my soul. Oh, rock my soul.